Hi, I'm Mercedes Fopp here at the Captured on Canvas studio. Welcome to Picture This. For today's painting, picture this. We have a nice light teal background with gold metallic chevron dancing across the canvas. We have a glass vase reflecting tons of beautiful colors holding a floral arrangement full of greens, baby's breath, and a couple flowers as well. Before we get started, we'll make sure we have everything sitting in front of us. Most importantly, on our easel, we have a blank 16 by 20 canvas. We'll also be using quite a few brushes today. We will have a large flat tip brush, a middle-sized flat tip brush, and I'm also using an angular brush. I like those. I'll have a kind of a middle-sized round tip that had better days. It's definitely a little wore out, which is going to be helpful for later, and a nice tiny round tip for tiny detail. And for the paint colors today, we have a ton of colors. We're going to have a ton of white, some teal, oxide green, red, raw sienna, gold metallic, and some black. To get started, I always start with the background and paint the closest thing last. That being said, I have a lot of background to start coloring in, and I'm going to do that nice light teal color. So to do that, I'm going to be using my largest square tip brush. And because it's such a large canvas, I'm going to make sure I grab plenty of white since it's a bright color to start. Take that, separate it into the center of my palette. I'd say I want it at least the size of 2/4. I never like to have to remix the color if I don't have to. Then I'm going to take a little bit of teal on the corner of my brush and start mixing that in. Okay. So I like that color there. Now I'm just going to go ahead and do the most difficult part. Getting that paint on the canvas for the first time. Nice long brush strokes. I'm going to go ahead and just color in the entire canvas. Now that I got my background all teal, I'm going to go ahead and clean off my brush. Just remember when cleaning your brush, gently stir it in the bottom of your cup, wipe it on the sides, and repeat. Now for the next part of my background, I'm going to create those gold metallic chevron that dance across the canvas all the way down. I am going to be using my large flat tip brush. Now you can choose to do this when the paint is a little wet, or you can wait and let it dry. Either way, it's going to work. Might be kind of cool to let it blend in a little bit with the teal if the paint is still wet. So I'm going to take a little bit of that gold metallic. I'm going to be holding it standing up the entire time, and I'm going to zigzag all the way across to create that chevron pattern. Start probably about a few inches down on this left side. Go up, then I'm going to go down kind of in the middle. And then angle back up here, and then back down. Might go over it just to darken it up a little bit. And then I'm going to continue that same pattern all the way down, probably about 4 more times. Now I'm going to go ahead and start the glass vase for my flowers. It's okay to have all this paint a little wet in the background because I'm going to be doing a lot of blending with all the same colors anyways, so I'm not even going to clean my brush. I'm going to go ahead and just start with white, and I'm going to draw out where I want my vase. I'd say it'd be about or just a little bit from left on center, and I'm gonna have that right wall be about the center here. And then I'm gonna go maybe a few inches from the lower corner here, making about that wide. And I want it to come about halfway up on the canvas. So I'll just use the wide side of my brush, pulling straight up until I get the height of the vase that I want. And I'll do that for both sides of the vase. And just draw a straight line across to finish to the top of the vase. Then I'm going to go ahead and just take that white and fill in the rest throughout the middle there. Nice long brush strokes up and down. Now I'm going to dance in some cool colors here. So it's not solid white. I'm going to take a little bit of teal. Still using the wide side of my brush, I'm just going to spread it in a little bit here and there. Nice light pressure. I don't want to cover up all of the white, so I'm using very little paint and just blending it in. This is where you can get really creative, because honestly you can blend in whatever colors you want. If I want to go and add a little bit of that yellow, might be kind of fun. I'll just kind of flick that up from the bottom maybe this time. Can always take a little bit of that gold metallic. And to shadow the bottom of my vase, I can use a little bit of black, just tiny, tiny bit. I always like to wipe it on the palette edge there a few times, and then start from the bottom and flick up. Pull it away from the canvas as I pull it up. And because I know my flowers will be shading the top here, I'll do the same thing at the top. Kind of flick it down. All right, so that concludes my background for now. We're going to let that dry before we start our flowers, so we'll take a little break. Welcome back to Picture This. I have just finished my background, so now I'm going to start a flower arrangement in my glass vase. It's going to be multiple layers of greenery and flowers. So I'm going to go ahead and start with some of the greens that are going to be in the far back of the bouquet. I'm going to use my largest big flat brush here, and I'm going to take some green and separate that on my palette. I know this color is really see-through, so I always like to add a little bit of white and black to make it a little less transparent, and also toning it down a little bit. And then I'm going to take a little bit of black just to tone it down a little. And a little bit at a time. All right, so I'm feeling pretty good about that color. As long as you get some white and black in there, it's good. So I'm going to start with some really big green leaves, kind of the shape of a football. I'm just going to kind of making them float, kind of filling out the top portion of my canvas. So I'm going to start with one maybe over here, up and out of the way there from the vase. I'm going to start with one side of that leaf, nice big curve, and mirroring that on the bottom. And coloring it in. Nice long brush strokes are always helpful here, especially if it still is a little see-through. Okay, I'll go ahead and make another one, maybe over here in the upper left corner. And then I'm going to go ahead and clean off my brush. And now I'm going to go ahead and start my next layer of greens. So I'm going to basically create just all the stems. This is going to be for the flowers, the baby's breath, maybe even some other leaves. So I'm going to go to my middle-sized flat brush. I like the angular brush. It's a little bit easier to draw lines with, I feel. So I'm going to go ahead and take some green to the side, and I'm going to darken it this time. I'm not going to add as much white. I want it to be darker than those first leaves I made. So take a good scoop of black and mix that in. And I'm feeling pretty good about that. It's kind of like a hunter or army green. And then I'll use my light pressure with this brush and drag across the canvas to make those nice thin stems. So once again, kind of filling up the top portion here. I'm going to start always from the middle because I want these to start behind the flowers or from the vase. And they're just going to angle out here. And if they're a little wavy, that's okay. That's perfect. It makes it look more realistic. Now with this green, we can start getting fancy with these first leaves we made, adding that line through the middle, and maybe a couple little lines throughout the leaf as well. So I feel pretty good about the balance of those stems. I'm going to go ahead and clean off my brush just briefly there so I can go back to the first green that I had to add a bunch of little leaves in. So I'm going to use that nice light green that I just mixed previously, and I'm actually going to let the brush do the work for me. If I just tap the brush on the long end there, it should make that leaf shape pretty fancy. So I'm going to go ahead and just pick out a place where I want to add some leaves, and I'm just going to do one touch. They're just little leaves. And I like to kind of have them floating, kind of give it that airy, abstract look. And we'll call that good for right now. I'll go ahead now and clean off my brush. Now that I have all of my greens and my stems, I'm going to start adding in the baby's breath. Another really fun step. Again, letting the brush do the work for us. I'm going to be using that medium-sized round tip brush that has been used a few times or two, and it's going to work out great because it's going to give it that perfect texture for each of the baby's breath blooms there. So I'm just going to use a little bit of white, and I might just dabble on my palette to make sure I'm not going too crazy with too much paint. Then I'm just going to do one touch with the brush. And I'm just going to do that near the ends of my stems, wherever I want some baby's breath. Alrighty, so I feel pretty good about that for now. I'm going to go ahead and just start my first set of flowers here just to get a first coat started. So clean your brush after the baby's breath. And now I'm going to move back to my middle-sized flat tip brush. I just like it nice and big for coloring in areas. And I'm going to decide the color that I want the peonies, the big flowers that I'm going to have clustered in the middle. So I kind of want kind of a dark pink or even a coral would be pretty. So I'm going to start with a big scoop of red, separating that on my palette, and then taking a good scoop of white and mixing that in. And if you want it to be more of a coral, if you add just a tiny bit of that golden yellow, that'll give it more of that coral color. So once you get the color of your flower, I'm going to go ahead and create the shape of the flower. So I'm going to have 3 of them kind of staggered throughout the middle here, and you can make them all different sizes as well. Down here on the left, I'm going to make a nice big flower here. So I'm going to start with one dot where I want the center of it to be, and I'm going to spiral out, and that's going to help me keep that circular shape that I want the flower to have. And then we're going to spiral out until we get the size flower that we want. What's nice about this is it's already colored in. And I like to go back, thin out that paint, flatten it out. And if we want, we can add a little bit of a wave to the outer edge for those petals. And I'll do that 2 more times for each of my flowers. So we're going to go ahead and let that dry before we do some more detail and more flowers. So we'll take a little break while it dries. Welcome back to Picture This. I'm working on a flower arrangement, so I'm going to be adding the next flowers as well as all the detail to finish it. I'm going to be using my middle-sized brush to do the next cluster of flowers. I want some kind of like a yellow-orange color. So I'm going to start with a big scoop of my raw sienna here and separate that on my palette. And I'm going to add a little bit of red, just a little bit goes a long way, to make it a little bit more orangey. And maybe a little bit more. And I want this to be a little bit brighter too, so I'm going to take a good scoop of white and mix that in. Once again, try my best to keep it in a nice little pile here. And I may add a little bit more yellow back to it. Go. Alrighty, so I'm feeling pretty good about that. It's kind of a nice light orange. I'm going to make some flowers just with the 5 basic petals. I'm going to fill those in anywhere I feel that I need to fill up some more space. I'm really thinking especially right here between these 2 big flowers. So I'm going to start with a dot. This is going to be where I want the middle of my flower to be, where all the petals come to. So each of these petals are just going to be a bunch of footballs, just like those first leaves we did. So I'm going to have one going up and then coloring each of these in with nice long brush strokes. Have one up and to the right. And a little bit angled up to the left. And this is where you get to decide if you want it to be in front of or behind these flowers too. If you want it in front of, you just draw it over top. Otherwise, if this petal is going to go behind, I'm just going to stop right at it and color in that little area. I have my 5th one down here. And coloring it in. Okay, I'm going to add one maybe to the left here. Once again, starting with the dot, same thing. While these flowers are wet, I like to add a little bit of texture to it with different colors. So I'm going to go ahead and just wipe off this brush, and I'm going to take that pink that I used for the first flowers there and just dust a little bit of that in each of the petals. So just one quick swipe, and let's blend it in a little bit. So it takes very little of this paint. Quick little flicks. And there we go. Now I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit more detail so you can actually see the petals on the peonies in the middle. I want a nice light shade of that pink that I originally made. So I'm actually going to take some of that to the side on my palette, wherever I have room. We're getting messy here. And I'm going to take a big scoop of white and mix that in to make a nice light shade. And we want a good contrast between the two. Feeling pretty good about that. So, taking a little bit of that paint there. And this is going to be kind of like squiggly lines throughout. So I'm going to start with the outside of the flower. I'm going to start with the flower that's in front first to make sure that I get that one fully done. So I'm going to start at the edge and just add little curves for the highlight of the top of each of those petals. So some might be a little bit longer, some might be shorter, some will kind of come in a little bit towards the center. However it lays out. Then I'm going to kind of do that same thing through another layer, still keeping that circular shape, and then bringing it all the way into the center. And in the center, sometimes it's fun to add a little spiral to finish it. We're going to do that same thing for each of those. Now we can get fancy with just a bunch of little detail. Just kind of bounce around wherever you feel like you want to add some color. I'm going to go ahead and start with the centers of each of those flowers. So I'm still going to use that same brush, take some white to the side, and I might just add a little bit of that mustard yellow to brighten it up. So I get some good contrast on that orange. And I'm just going to go ahead and use the tip of that brush, make a little circle for the center for each of those flowers. And you can always add a little highlight to parts of those petals too, if you want them to come out a little bit from that dark background. There's no right and wrong here. Okay, I'm going to go wipe off my brush, and I might just make a little bit more of a lime green too. So I'm going to take some of this green, mix that right over the yellow me as well, and take a little bit of the yellow, mix that in. All right, it's not so lime green, but that's okay. I like kind of the light sage green too, so I'm just going to use that to kind of break up these leaves. Just kind of adds a little bit texture to them, a little bit of highlight, making it look more realistic. Just kind of focusing on the areas between all the veins in the leaf. All right, now I'm going to clean my brush, get a fresh start. Now I'm going to start the final detailing with all like kind of the black outlining, any extra to the stems, all that fun stuff. So I'm going to still use that middle-sized angular brush. I like this brush for outlining, but sometimes the small brush works better depending on what you're outlining. So I'm going to start a little bit of black here. I might actually separate it on my palette because I have a mess. This is funny. I'm going to go ahead and separate it over here. I'm going to take my brush, dip it in the water, and mix that water from the brush into the black. This is going to help make those nice smooth lines. So watering down that black is very key when you're outlining. So just a little bit on our brush then. Now I'm going to start with outlining whatever's in front first. So I'm going to start with that biggest flower here and just really light pressure outlining each of those petals. Now you can choose to fully outline it, but for me sometimes I just like to partially outline it, so that it's not too outlined. But then I'm going to go ahead and just dust across the top of each of those petals. And I'll get this flower here next, and then just continue through. Nice light pressure. Sometimes I like to dance these other little lines out there further, kind of giving it more of that abstract look. Filling in the area, making it look like a lot is going on. Outline this guy. Same way. Next flower, doing the same way again. And my last flower. Then I'm going to partially outline those big leaves, bring those out from the background a little bit. I might take a little bit of that black and also outline the bottom of the centers to kind of create a little bit of a shadow, or just a quick little swipe there. And if you want to darken any of the stems, maybe they're a little faint in the background, we can always darken those up a little bit, especially any areas that they are probably shadowed going behind the flowers. We can outline that vase a little bit too, so nice light pressure. Kind of going around all the flowers there too. Alrighty, feeling pretty good about that. So I'm going to go ahead and clean off my brush. And I'm going to use, finally, my tiny brush to finish my piece with my signature. So light pressure, make it with some black maybe. Actually, let's do pink, why not? This is more fun. And I always like to sign in the bottom right corner. Thank you for following along with me, Mercedes Fabb, at the Captured on Canvas studio. We'll see you next time on Picture This.